something huge clicked in my mind. It made sense. When I am joyful and happy and excited, it feels like my cells have more energy. So that clicked with what I was learning in medical school at the time, cellular biology, biochemistry. And I said, it just makes sense that the cellular functions and the chemical reactions in my body, when I am joyful, are operating easier, like an engine with good oil. So there was an intellectual click there, but there was also a little bit of a spiritual click. Wait a minute, I used to know all this. I'm just remembering it now. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Spirit. I'm your host, Dr. Pichardo-Johansson, retired board-certified hematologist oncologist and twice cancer survivor. My intention for this show is to bridge the gap between medical science and spirit, reconcile conventional medicine and holistic wellness, and to normalize the conversation about the spiritual dimensions of health. And today we'll be focusing on the why. Why do I believe in the body-mind-spirit connection so strongly? And this is something that comes not only from my personal experience, but also from my professional experience as an oncologist for 15 years. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Help us spread the mission of this channel, which is not only education, but also awareness. When you share this video, when you like it, when you comment, you are helping us change the conversation and shift the consensus reality in the world. Thank you. It means a lot to me. Now, back to the show. So, body, mind, spirit, medicine, part 1. Why I believe in the body, mind, spirit connection. When I was 19, my mother was diagnosed with incurable cancer. Some of you may have heard that story before that I have shared in bits and pieces, and usually I mention it to show how my eventually becoming an oncologist was not necessarily something that came from a position of wholeness. It was more of a longing to finish unfinished businesses, maybe not the healthiest decision I ever made. But it has taken me decades to get to a point of peace and completely process the grief of that time to be able to tell you that part of the story I'm going to tell you today. I was 19, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and to explain what type of 19-year-old I was, I need to tell you two things. First, I was raised in a very loving, close-knit Catholic family, and that was my first slap on the face to say, oh my God, bad things do happen to good people. I've been lied to all my life when they told me that if you follow God, God takes care of you. God does not have my back. It took me a long time to understand that that kind of started eroding my innocent faith. But the second thing that I want you to understand is that even if I was only 19, I was already a medical student. It's long to explain. I started school early, skipped grades, graduated from high school at age 15. And I was in a developing country that liked to use medical students as cheap labor. Being 19, I was being treated by all the doctors taking care of my mother as one of them. They were not holding punches. And one of the first things they told me was multiple myeloma, the disease my mother had, which nowadays has excellent prognosis, but back then was a very different story. Multiple myeloma is incurable. Most patients get to live only 2 years. But your mother's x-rays look so horrible. We suspect this has been going on for a very long time. We suspect she has at most 3 months to live. And that's not something easy for any 19-year-old to hear. But luckily, my mother's oncologist was someone who I will forever be grateful for. She did something doctors don't do enough. Doctors should do more of this. Open your ears, any healthcare providers out there. She did not tell me about the dozens or hundreds of horrible cases she had seen. She found the one case that did better than average, the outlier, and told me about him. This patient that had the same disease but had been around for years and was doing great and had a great quality of life. And I latched to that story with everything I had. And I said, whatever he did, I want to do it for my mother. Tell me, what's his secret? And the doctor thought about it for a moment and then said, you know what? All I can think of is that he is unusually chill. This patient is always happy, laughing, joking, doesn't take life too seriously. And at that time, something huge clicked in my mind. It made sense. At the age of 19, I had already had my baby exposure to the range of human emotions. I was a very anxious girl who couldn't stand getting a B and cried after bad exams. I had a little crush in a guy who didn't care for me and I had a heart broken. So I had already experienced that. When I am sad, depressed, anxious, it feels like poison running through my body. And when I am joyful and happy and excited, it feels like my cells have more energy. So that clicked with what I was learning in medical school at the time, cellular biology, biochemistry. And I said, it just makes sense that the cellular functions and the chemical reactions in my body, when I am joyful, are operating easier, like an engine with good oil. And when I'm down, it's like an engine with maple syrup or honey inside that is working extra. So there was an intellectual click there, but I have gotten to recognize now over the years, there was also a little bit of a spiritual click. I've heard some near death experience survivors talk about the download or a moment when their eyes open and they say, wait a minute, I used to know all this. I'm just remembering it now. That's how it felt. Like, yes, this makes sense at the spiritual level, not only at the intellectual level. So, in my humble contribution to my mother's health, I made it my mission to cheer her up. At first, I thought it was going to be difficult. My Latin family did not talk about mental health, but my mother had a little bit of depression. I was afraid what was going to happen if she dwelled in self pity and allowed to down spiral. I had already heard about the worst thing that you could do for a cancer patient was becoming bedridden. Then you get muscle atrophy, blood clots, and you die quickly. So I made it my task to make her happy. I was lucky that I happened to have a summer off from medical school at the time, so I could go with her to every medical appointment, chemotherapy, radiation. I started monitoring her visitors to make sure that all the Debbie Downers and the toxic people and people who gave her the PDIs were minimized. I monitor whatever she was watching in TV and reading to make sure she was constantly exposed to comedy, to happy ending stories, to things that uplifted her. And I became a ninja jiu-jitsu master of reframing. I believe that was the beginning of me becoming a life coach many years later. I became an expert in reframing her arguments when she was started to slip into despair, making her laugh and bringing her back to gratitude. And I noticed an immediate, impossible to ignore effect. Her mood and her physical symptoms were closely linked. It would make sense in one way around, of course. If you are in pain, you will feel miserable. But it was also the other way around. If she started the day okay and someone came and made her feel down, she would start getting more pain. If she was starting to go down in pain and I found a way to make her laugh, suddenly she was, oh, I'm feeling better. So it became like flying a kite or flying a hang glider. That if you had a gust of wind hit you, you had to course correct quickly, otherwise you would be nose down. So it was an art of correcting quick when she was starting to go in despair. Then the restaging studies came and it blew us away. Every single cancer lesion in the bone x-rays was gone. Her bone marrow biopsy showed a decrease in the plasma cells to the point that now they were in the higher range of normal. And at the time, the doctors were baffled. My mother just said, of course, it was a miracle. And I wondered, could it have had something to do? And of course, correlation and causation are not the same. We'll talk epidemiology in the future. Study with an N of 1 doesn't mean anything. But there was something important I learned from this experience. Taking care of joy. Best case scenario could theoretically, potentially help you get a better response to treatment. But worst case scenario, the worst that could happen was that it could improve your quality of life. Hell yeah, sign me up for it. That absolutely makes sense. It didn't matter if it just happened to distract you and made it easier for you to finish the treatment. It was contributing and it was worth pursuing. And I'm going to tell you, it has taken me many years to really see the happy for now in that story. It wasn't a happy ending because eventually the disease came back. We actually put it into remission, then came back again. Eventually she did pass away. But that was almost 4.5 years later. Twice as much as the best case scenario and 16 times the original prognosis the doctors gave me. And it may not sound as much, but those 4 years made a huge difference. They allowed my mother to fulfill dreams. She went to Europe. She painted tons of oil paintings. It allowed her to be present in my sister's wedding. She cried of joy in my medical school graduation. She celebrated her 50th birthday with a big party. That was one of her dreams. It made a huge difference. By the way, if you have gone through a loss, I want to tell you, hang in there. It does get better. When you are deep in the moment of grief, you think it's never going to go away. But I promise you that if you hang in there long enough, the moment comes when the sad memories start fading and you start remembering again the joy and the wonderful loving times. You can imagine how that impacted me as an oncologist. The moment I was able to have some sane in my oncology practice, I started applying as my number one principle that my priority was making the patients feel joyful.